Robert Elmore Jr. has been charged with capital murder, while the child's mother, Samantha McCormack, has been charged with reckless murder. In part, we're told, because she delayed in calling 911. Investigators tell us the baby was injured around 5 p.m. on Friday, but it wasn't until 7 p.m. at this gas station behind me that someone called 911.
Welcome back, and thanks for being here. I'm Cassie, and this is A Wicked World. If you haven't checked out A Wicked World on Patreon yet, and want to have access to over 50 exclusive Patreon-only videos, with new ones being added each month, then make sure you check it out using the link in the description box below. Now, the story I have for you today is a rather unbelievable one, about two brothers who were killed years apart, in almost the exact same manner. This is the story of Enzo and Jessie McCormack. Jesse Taylor McCormack was born on April 30th, 2016, to his mother, Samantha McCormack, and his father, Joshua Clark. His younger twin siblings, Skylar and Enzo Lane McCormack, were born 2 years later on March 20th, 2018. The children's parents, Samantha and Joshua, had gotten married just months after the birth of the twins, but then they separated just 2 months later. When Enzo was only 7 months old, in October of 2018, his mother lost custody of him and his siblings. But after a protection from abuse order was obtained by Samantha against her boyfriend who was currently living with her, Robert Elmore Jr., was issued in March of 2019. The children would be returned to her in June. At this time, there was a specific order from Child Services stating that Robert was not to be around Enzo or his siblings, in part due to the fact that Samantha had previously said he'd been abusive towards her, and she was scared that he could harm her or the children. But just 2 months after they were returned to Samantha's care, on September 6, 2019, around 7 p.m., emergency services were responding to the Locust Fork grocery and hardware store on Alabama 79 in Locust Fork, Alabama. A call had been placed to 911 stating that there was a little boy there who was injured. When officers arrived on the scene, they would find 18-month-old Enzo McCormack unresponsive, and he was turning blue. They additionally noticed that he had knots and bruising on his forehead, as well as bloodshot eyes. Enzo's mother, Samantha, told authorities that she had been home with the children around 5:30, and they were eating when she went into the other room to use the bathroom. Samantha then said that she heard a noise that sounded like something falling. When she went back out into the other room, Enzo was choking and had fallen out of his chair. However, the mother was able to clear his mouth, and he stopped choking. Then, a little while later, Samantha noticed that Enzo wasn't doing well, so she decided to take him to the hospital. She did have to wait until her grandmother arrived at the home to take care of her other children, though. So in the meantime, Samantha bathed Enzo. Then, once her grandmother arrived, she dressed him and put him in the car to bring him to the hospital. On the way there, she had to stop for gas at the hardware store, which also had an attached gas station. While inside, Samantha told an employee that her son had gotten hurt after falling at home. The thing is, the mother wasn't there just because she desperately needed gas in order to get her to the hospital, but she was also there buying a pack of cigarettes, while Enzo was in serious distress in the back of her vehicle. When the worker had gone out to Samantha's car, they noticed that Enzo was limp, and so they called 911. This employee also happened to be Samantha's boyfriend's sister, Heather Elmore. Enzo would be brought to the Locust Fork Fire Station, where air transport was waiting to rush him to Children's of Birmingham Hospital. Once there, the toddler remained on a ventilator for 3 days, until September 9th, 2019, at which point the doctors determined that he had no brain activity and nothing further could be done for him. Enzo passed away that day. The little boy had a skull fracture and an internal brain injury, likely from being violently shaken. When he had arrived at the hospital, he had been in shock and had virtually no brain function. Doctors would almost immediately inform law enforcement that his injuries were not consistent with Samantha's story. They had been caused intentionally and by an adult. When the first responders had been waiting for air transport for Enzo, his mother's boyfriend, Robert Elmore, along with his parents and Enzo's siblings, showed up at the scene. Robert said that he had received a text message from Samantha saying that the little boy was ill. He then claimed that he'd gone to Samantha's grandmother's house to pick up the kids, knowing that he was not allowed at Samantha's home. But when Robert was further questioned by detectives, he was unable to give the grandmother's address or phone number. Authorities then went to the home where Samantha said that Enzo's fall had occurred, only to find out that she did not live there and had not been there. It was then that the mother admitted that she had actually been living with her boyfriend Robert on Langingham Road in Cleveland. So investigators went there to secure the scene instead. Child Services also went and checked on Enzo's siblings and brought them to the hospital for examination. This was not only due to the fact that Enzo's injuries were very suspicious, but it was also due to the fact that the little boy had been brought to the hospital wearing a pizza bag. When the other children were examined by doctors, no injuries were found on Enzo's twin sister. However, his older brother Jesse had bruises under his chin and behind his ears. He also had a skull fracture that was similar to his little brother's. Following this, the children will be placed into Child Protective Services custody. Police, of course, wanted to speak with Robert now, especially since they knew that he was living with them. And Robert would go on to give several versions of what had happened that day. During his first interview, he completely denied hurting Enzo at all. But during a second interview with police, he would say that the little boy had fallen accidentally while he was taking him out of his playpen. This had caused Enzo to hit his head on the floor and fall unresponsive, so Robert had picked him up and shaken him to see if he was okay. Then, Robert messaged Samantha, who told him to wait for her to get back from work. Neither of them called 911. But Robert also admitted that he had not told Samantha the full truth about what had happened to Enzo because he was afraid she would be angry with him. According to Robert, he had been watching the children that day and other days as well because he had recently lost his job. Then, when Samantha spoke with police a second time, she would admit that she had lied to them at first because she was afraid that Child Services would take her other children again. She now stated that after she arrived home, as Robert had been babysitting, Enzo was bleeding from his mouth, so she went to get a popsicle to put on his cut. Shortly after, Enzo felt unresponsive, so Samantha showered with him in an attempt to revive him. But when he wouldn't come to, she put him in the car and drove to the gas station. Upon Robert being interviewed a third time, he had yet another story to tell. He was now saying that he had become infuriated with the 18-month-old and had lost his temper after Enzo had pulled out some of his chest hairs. This had caused Robert to drop the toddler, who then hit his head on the pack-and-play and the floor. When Robert realized that Enzo was unresponsive, he shook him to try to wake him up, then texted Samantha. A text message that Robert had sent to Samantha at 5:41 p.m. that day said that Enzo ain't breathing right. He is limp and almost blue. Yet neither one of them thought it was appropriate at that point to contact 911. Both 24-year-old Samantha McCormack and her 28-year-old boyfriend Robert Elmore Jr. were placed under arrest. They were charged in connection with Enzo's death and held without bond. At first, Samantha had been charged with first-degree reckless assault, and Robert with attempted murder, but they were both later charged with capital murder. While they were awaiting trial, the father of Enzo and his siblings, Joshua Clark, filed for and obtained custody of the other two children. Then, on January 18, 2023, police officers were called down to Northeast Alabama Regional Medical Center for suspected CA. When they arrived, they found the medical staff treating an unconscious 6-year-old Jesse, who was also bruised from his face to his feet. The little boy would then be transferred to Children's of Alabama with critical injuries. There, he was put on life support. However, it would be terminated 2 days later, on January 20th, 2023, and Jesse would pass away. He had a skull fracture with bleeding and swelling under his scalp. He additionally had bruising behind his ears that would have occurred within a few hours of him sustaining his skull fracture. Jesse's cause of death would be determined to be from blunt force trauma, and his manner of death was homicide. His father, Joshua, who currently had custody of him, was interviewed by detectives. And he would tell them that he had come home from work after a long, stressful day to lay down on the couch for a nap. The father was later awoken when Jesse and another child began fighting. So Joshua decided to punish his son by making him hold a pair of combat boots to his side. But Jesse began defying his father and backtalked. This enraged Joshua, so he hit him with a belt. Just once, though. Not believing this story, authorities further pressed Joshua, and he admitted that he had hit him a few times with a belt. In reality, Jesse had actually been beaten to death by a combination of a belt and his father's hands. Joshua's live-in girlfriend had been bathing her daughter and was about to jump in the shower herself when she heard him disciplining his son. She knew that he was striking him with a belt, but she didn't become concerned until she heard the little boy stop crying altogether. When she stepped out of the room to see what was wrong, she saw that Joshua was holding Jesse in his arms, and the little boy looked to be having a seizure. It was at that point that they had rushed him to the hospital. Ultimately, Joshua would be charged with capital murder in relation to Jesse's death. The little boy's mother, who was still awaiting her trial in connection with Enzo's murder, requested that she be let out of jail to go to Jesse's funeral. However, a judge denied her request. Then, in October of 2023, in relation to Enzo's murder, Robert Elmore would be convicted of capital murder. He was also convicted of aggravated CA in relation to Jesse from back in 2019. Robert would be sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. Then, in July of 2024, Enzo and Jesse's mother, Samantha, would plead guilty to a charge of felony murder during the course of CA. She was sentenced to 25 years in prison. The boy's father, Joshua Clark, is still awaiting his trial. Following Jesse's death, the Calhoun County school system raised money to help pay for headstones for both him and his brother Enzo. Enzo's funeral was held on September 17, 2019, at Edgemont Cemetery in Anniston, Alabama. A celebration of life was held for his brother, Jesse McCormack, on January 27, 2023, at Anniston Memorial Funeral Home. He was then buried next to Enzo at Edgemont Cemetery. Well, thank you for listening to Enzo and Jesse's stories today. This is insane that two siblings were killed years apart, but in a very similar way, by being beaten to death. You would think that their father Joshua, after already losing one child to CA, would do anything he could to protect his remaining children, not make one of them suffer the same horrible fate. So if you like true crime and you want to hear it from me, then don't forget to hit that subscribe button below. And turn on your notifications too, so you'll know when I upload a new video, which is at least 3 times every single week. Thanks for watching A Wicked World today. Until next time, take care guys. Bye. Thank you to all the patrons of A Wicked World. Now, there's even more of A Wicked World on Patreon, so check it out on patreon.com/awickedworld, or use the Patreon app. You'll have access to exclusive videos each month and more. Any support truly helps to make sure the victims are never forgotten and to highlight the shortcomings of society associated with each case. Do you have a suggestion for a story you'd like to see me cover? If so, send me an email to awickedworldtruecrime@gmail.com.